Alina Price sat motionless in her worn cloth armchair, the same one she had bought 20 years ago with her first decent paycheck from cleaning mansions in the Hollywood Hills. The phone screen glowed cold and merciless in her trembling hands. Available balance, $0.00. She blinked hard, hoping the numbers would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. They didn't. Her entire life savings, over $80,000 earned through 3 decades of scrubbing floors, washing windows, and enduring the careless cruelty of wealthy employers, had vanished. Alina was 68 years old, though her back felt 90 and her heart felt ancient. She had raised her son Jackson alone after his father abandoned them for a cosmetics saleswoman when the boy was barely 8 months old. Every dollar she had saved represented a sacrifice. Meals she had skipped, shoes she had worn until they fell apart, birthdays she had celebrated with homemade cake instead of store-bought presents. The phone felt like a burning stone in her palm. She dialed the bank with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking. A robotic voice answered first, cheerfully offering options that meant nothing to her panic. Finally, a human voice came on the line, flat and professionally distant. "Yes, ma'am, I see the transactions here. Multiple wire transfers were made online over the past 48 hours, totaling $83,417. All funds were transferred to an account belonging to Jackson Arthur Price." Alina's throat closed. The room tilted slightly, and she gripped the armrest to steady herself. "Ma'am, are you still there? Would you like to file a fraud report?" She couldn't speak. The words were there, trapped behind the crushing weight in her chest. She ended the call without responding and sat in the thick, suffocating silence of her small home. Outside, an ice cream truck played its cheerful melody, oblivious to the devastation unfolding behind her thin walls. Children laughed and shouted in the street. Life continued as if nothing had shattered. Then the landline rang, cutting through her paralysis like a knife. "Alina, honey, did you see your Jackson's Instagram?" It was Doris from next door, her voice bright with excitement. "He's in Rome, living it up with that wife of his and her mama. They're eating at fancy restaurants, drinking expensive wine. Lord have mercy, they look like movie stars." Alina felt her soul leave her body for just a moment. She walked slowly to her bedroom, each step an effort, and retrieved the old smartphone she kept charged but rarely used. She wasn't one for social media, but she followed Jackson from a distance, watching the life he had built without her like someone peering through a frosted window. There he was, her only son, the baby boy she had brought into this world with pain and terror and overwhelming love. He stood in front of the Colosseum, wearing a crisp white linen shirt she knew she hadn't bought him, his arm around Tanya, his wife of 3 years. On his other side stood Rhonda, Tanya's mother, a woman who had always looked at Alina like something unpleasant she had stepped in. The caption read, "Rome, my new beginning, I deserve this." In the comments below, Tanya had written, "Good things come to those who wait. Thanks for everything, mama-in-law," followed by a money bag emoji. Alina didn't cry. She didn't scream or throw the phone or collapse to the floor. She simply stood there, holding the device like it might explode, and then something strange happened. She smiled. It wasn't a smile of joy or forgiveness or understanding. It was the smile of someone who had finally, after years of denial, seen the truth with brutal clarity. It was the smile of a woman who had nothing left to lose, and therefore everything to gain. Far away, under Roman skis and cobblestone streets that had witnessed centuries of human folly, Jackson raised his wine glass without guilt. "See," Tanya said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "It was a good idea to take the money. She's going to die soon anyway. Better we use it before it all goes to medical bills and nursing homes." Rhonda let out a harsh laugh that carried across the restaurant patio. "That clueless old woman. She doesn't even know what a passport looks like. She was never going to do anything useful with that cash anyway." Jackson said nothing. He looked at the ancient ruins with shining eyes, but something churned in his stomach, something that felt uncomfortably like shame. He pushed it down the way he had learned to do as a child when his mother told him to hold on, that they would eat tomorrow, that everything would be all right. Back in her small house in South Central Los Angeles, Alina moved through the rooms like a ghost. On the shelf were photographs of Jackson at every age. His first day of preschool, wearing clothes she had sewn herself. His middle school graduation, when she had worked double shifts for a month to buy him new shoes. His college diploma, paid for with the land her father had left her, the only inheritance she had ever received. She had given him everything. At 18, she had sold her engagement ring to pay his high school tuition. At 23, she had sold the family land. At 30, she had helped pay for his wedding to Tanya, even though that woman had never shown her anything but thinly veiled contempt. "Mom, you don't understand how the world works now," Jackson had told her dismissively just months ago. "Tanya and I have big plans, real plans. You'll always be in my heart, but you can't be tied to me forever." A week before discovering the theft, Alina had tried to visit him at his apartment in Studio City. She had brought a tray of her famous fried chicken and collard greens, made from scratch the way he used to love. She rang the bell. No one answered. She waited under the brutal California sun for 2 hours until the doorman approached her. "Are you looking for Mr. Jackson Price?" "Yes, I'm his mother." The doorman shifted uncomfortably. "Ah, well, I was instructed not to let you in if you come unannounced." Alina felt something crack inside her chest. "Why is that?" "I couldn't tell you, ma'am, but those are my instructions." She had walked home that day instead of taking the bus. She wanted the air to hit her face, even if it was hot and thick with exhaust fumes. She thought about every meal she had denied herself, every dawn she had woken in darkness to work overtime, every penny she had saved for her son's future. That night, Doris came over with pecan pie and coffee. "You've always been strong, Alina. Don't let this break your heart. Jackson is young. Maybe he'll come to his senses." Alina sighed, her gaze distant and hard. "Do you think children ever regret it, Doris?" "Of course they do. When their mother isn't around anymore, they realize everything." "Well, I hope it's not too late when he realizes." Doris studied her friend's face. "What are you going to do?" Alina looked up, and in her eyes was something that hadn't been there before. Something cold and sharp and impossibly calm. "I'm going to smile just like they taught me to. I've cried enough, Doris. Now I'm going to smile in silence because I have nothing left to lose. And when a woman has nothing left to lose, she becomes dangerous." Meanwhile, night was falling in Rome. Jackson stepped out of the shower and heard Tanya's voice drifting from the balcony. She was on the phone, speaking in a low tone she thought was private. "Yes, we did it. The old lady never even knew. The money's here. Tomorrow we open the account in Barcelona and we get rid of Jackson. Yes, of course. He thinks we're in this together. Such a fool." Jackson froze. Water dripped from his hair onto the tile floor. He didn't move, didn't breathe. He felt ice crystallize in his veins. He didn't say anything. He walked back to the bedroom as if he hadn't heard a word, lay down next to Tanya, who pretended to be asleep, and closed his eyes. But something had changed forever, and he didn't know yet that the worst was still coming. Back in South Central Los Angeles, Alina prepared a cup of chamomile tea as the night thickened around her house. Outside, dogs fought over a torn garbage bag. Inside, she picked up a notebook, the one she used to write down recipes she never got around to cooking. With shaky handwriting, she wrote, "This is not the end. It is the beginning of my silence, and my silence will hurt more than any scream." Then she closed the notebook, lay down in bed, and for the first time in weeks she slept without tears. While she slept in her humble home, her son in a luxury hotel suite in Rome checked his phone and found a notification that made his blood run cold. "Account blocked due to suspicious activity." "What?" he muttered, staring at the screen in disbelief. The first crack had just formed in his perfect new life, and Jackson had no idea that his mother, in her quiet determination, had already begun to move. Sometimes pain doesn't scream. Sometimes pain sits, watches, waits for exactly the right moment. And that moment was just beginning. The night hadn't entirely left South Central when Alina rose at dawn, her bones protesting with each movement. But this time, she didn't feel old. Something new was beating inside her chest, something that wasn't rage or sadness but pure, crystallized determination. While heating water on her ancient gas stove, she stared at the blue flame and remembered the first time she understood what it meant to be truly alone. She was 14 years old when she started cleaning houses in Brentwood, a skinny girl with badly braided hair, dark skin weathered by the sun, and hands already cracked from cheap soap. By that age, she knew the names of every stain remover and how to fold a wealthy woman's silk blouses without leaving a single wrinkle. At night, when she returned home, her mother was already asleep. Her father had left with a woman from a downtown bar and never looked back. Alina didn't cry. She just swallowed the pain and woke before dawn the next day to go back to work. At 17, she got pregnant with Jackson. His father was a boy 3 years older, someone who promised marriage and escape from that life. They lasted 8 months. The day he found out the baby was a boy, he disappeared with a woman who sold cosmetics door to door. Alina never saw him again. She didn't cry then either. She just clenched her jaw, adjusted her headscarf, and went out to find more houses to clean. She raised Jackson alone, carrying him on her back while she washed other people's laundry. When he started walking, she taught him to play with empty detergent caps as if they were toy cars. They had no toys, but they had stories. No refrigerator, but they had hot soup cooked on a hot plate. No television, but they had songs she sang until he fell asleep in her arms. He was her entire world. When Jackson turned 6, one of Alina's clients offered to pay for his private elementary school tuition if she agreed to work full-time and live in. Alina didn't think twice. She left her house, lived in the patron's rooftop apartment, and every weekend she crossed the city to see her son. She never arrived empty-handed. Sometimes a new notebook, sometimes just a candy bar, but always with a heart ready to listen to whatever Jackson wanted to tell her. Years passed and Jackson grew up. Alina struggled to learn how to write her full signature, her hand trembling as she practiced, just so she could sign school papers as the responsible party. She learned to read doctors' prescriptions and bank statements. She couldn't write well, but she understood enough not to let herself be cheated, or so she thought. At 16, Jackson told her something that became her reason for living. "Mom, when I make it big, the first thing I'll do is buy you a house where the cold doesn't come through the walls." And she replied without hesitation, "Don't buy me anything, son. Just don't forget me." Then came college. Alina sold the only land her father had left her, a small patch of earth in rural Georgia where she had always dreamed of building a cabin for her retirement. She sold it for less than it was worth because Jackson needed to pay the enrollment fee for accounting school, and as always, she didn't hesitate. "My son is going to be an accountant," she told her neighbors with fierce pride. "He's going to get out of this life." And he did get out, but not the way she had imagined. It was in his 3rd semester that he met Tanya, a girl with straightened hair, long artificial nails, and a smile that belonged in magazines. From the first time Alina saw her, she felt a stab of intuition in her stomach. Not jealousy or envy, but recognition. This woman had the look of someone who only knew how to take, never to give. Tanya came from a family that pretended to have more than they did. Her mother, Rhonda, wore knockoff designer clothes and spoke as if she had studied abroad. The first time they visited Alina's house, they exchanged glances that spoke volumes. "What a lovely color. The walls are very rustic," Rhonda said with barely concealed sarcasm. Tanya, seeing the cramped kitchen, made a comment in a low voice that Alina would never forget. "I don't know how Jackson grew up here. This looks like a shelter, not a home." Alina smiled as always, but something broke inside her that day. Years passed and Tanya gained ground in Jackson's life. First, she suggested that Alina not visit so often, then that she not voice opinions on their decisions, then that she not attend certain family events because she didn't fit in with their new circle of friends. Jackson, confused and desperately in love, slowly distanced himself from his mother. One night, already living with Tanya, Jackson visited Alina without warning. It was the last time he did so. She prepared pot roast and gravy, his favorite meal since childhood. "Mom, Tanya says you're too involved in our lives, that you don't let us grow as a couple." "I just want you to be happy, son," Alina said quietly, watching her food grow cold on the plate. "I don't need you to take care of me anymore," he replied, and the words cut deeper than he knew. "I'm a man now." Alina didn't cry. She just stood up, cleared the table, and told him to take the leftover roast with him. The following months were a parade of subtle dismissals. Tanya began managing Jackson's finances, convinced him to change bank accounts, and insisted he not tell his mother everything. According to her, Alina was a limited woman who wouldn't understand modern financial planning. Jackson, wrapped in a toxic mixture of ambition and emotional manipulation, agreed to everything. Alina began to notice strange things. A bank receipt that didn't match her records, a statement that never arrived in the mail, a life insurance policy she didn't remember authorizing. That's when she decided to reach out to Walter. Walter had been her first love, a childhood neighbor who had become a lawyer and now lived alone in an apartment crowded with old papers and fading memories. She sought him out without revealing too much. "Walter, how can I find out if someone is using my name for strange things?" "Are you in trouble, Alina?" "No, but I feel like my son isn't my son anymore." Walter studied her face carefully, asked for the few documents she had, and spent weeks reviewing transactions, signatures, and transfer records. Finally, one evening he invited her to his apartment. "Alina, your son put you as a guarantor on a joint account. You didn't sign anything, but the signature is there." "But I don't know how to write more than my name." "They forged your signature, and they've been taking money out little by little for 6 months." Alina said nothing. She took the papers, folded them carefully, placed them in her purse, and left in silence. That night the pain didn't let her sleep, not because of the money, but because of the truth her heart had been refusing to accept. Her son hadn't just been manipulated. He had become an active participant in betraying her. He had robbed his own mother. In the following days, Tanya and Rhonda organized the trip to Rome. Jackson, without a stable job, sold his car and then suggested using Alina's savings. "It's family money," Tanya said with casual cruelty. "Besides, your mother isn't going to use it. Don't be ridiculous." "I don't know, it's everything she has." "And why is she hoarding it? You're her son, you're not stealing. You're just borrowing it early." Jackson hesitated. His finger hovered over the mouse, but he did it. One night from his home computer, he transferred all the money in quick, decisive clicks, like someone pulling out a rotten tooth without anesthesia. He finished, took a deep breath, closed the laptop, and didn't look back. Alina discovered the betrayal the next day. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just wrote a single sentence in her notebook. "My son didn't die, but the mother in me did." From that moment on, everything changed. Her body kept aging, but her spirit hardened like steel in fire. She began to walk differently, her spine straighter despite the pain. She started making phone calls, checking emails, visiting offices. Something was being prepared in the silence. While in Rome, Jackson walked ancient stone streets, believing he had won some great victory. In South Central Los Angeles, his mother was weaving the web that would return everything they had taken from her. and Tanya was already planning how to disappear with the money and leave Jackson with nothing. What Jackson didn't know was that Alina was no longer the woman he remembered. That woman had died the moment she saw the zero balance on her phone screen. In her place remained a wounded mother, but an alert one. And when a wounded mother awakens, there is no hell she is unwilling to cross to see justice done. Alina said nothing, not that day nor the next nor the one after that. Her silence was no longer the kind that bleeds internally, swallowing pain until it poisons the soul. This was a different silence, sharp and observant, one that watches, registers every detail, and calculates the exact moment to strike. The words had dried up in her throat as if they no longer served any purpose. Because when a mother understands she has been replaced by a convenient mask, she no longer wastes breath on screaming. She transforms. Jackson didn't notice the difference, or perhaps he didn't want to. He was too busy living the life he had dreamed of, a life that didn't smell like fresh laundry hung to dry or morning coffee brewed on a hot plate. A life where the voice that woke him didn't say, "My baby boy," but "Sir," in restaurants with white tablecloths. It was a clean, elegant, and ultimately empty life. Tanya settled into his world as if she had always owned it. Jackson was fascinated by how she spoke with vocabulary Alina never used, how she moved gracefully in high heels, how she referred to things with an air of ownership that made everything seem possible. But behind her easy laugh and carefully filtered social media photos lurked a subtle, cruel, and devastatingly precise machine. Tanya knew exactly what she wanted, and she wanted it fast. A name, a bank account, and a man naive enough to sustain her elaborate facade. The first poisonous comments came disguised as light-hearted jokes. "Honey, why does your mother always have to have an opinion on everything?" Tanya said one evening while painting her nails in their apartment living room. "I don't want our future children growing up surrounded by poverty-level thinking." Jackson let out an uncomfortable laugh. It's not that she wants to control everything. It's just hard for her to let go. She's always been like that. "It's not love, it's pity disguised as devotion," Tanya replied coldly. "Women like your mother think they're martyrs for raising children alone, but they don't realize the past doesn't give them the right to drag everyone else down. I don't want that for you, for me, or for our children." Little by little, Tanya began dictating when they could visit Alina and when they couldn't. First, they were simply too busy. Then it was better to meet in public places like restaurants. Finally, Tanya declared she didn't feel comfortable entering Alina's house because it smelled musty and depressing. Jackson accepted everything without question. Every time Alina asked why they didn't visit as often, Jackson lowered his head like a scolded child. "We have too many things going on, Mom. You know, work pressures, wedding planning stuff." Alina only nodded, but there was no longer any innocence in her eyes. She was beginning to piece things together like someone carefully mending a torn fabric, examining every thread. Rhonda, Tanya's mother, didn't take long to involve herself. She never used outright insults, but her words were carefully chosen to sound educated while carrying just enough edge to wound. "Miss Alina, forgive me if I'm being too direct, but didn't you ever think about moving to a more decent neighborhood? I mean, you're getting older now. This area isn't safe for someone your age. And with that money you have saved, you could buy something better in a nicer part of town, couldn't you?" Alina looked Rhonda directly in the eye without blinking or responding, but something inside her made a sound like breaking glass. That day, she understood with perfect clarity that they didn't just want her far away. They had never wanted her close in the first place. One Sunday, during a family lunch organized by Tanya at a trendy restaurant, Alina decided to speak to her son privately. She waited for the moment when Rhonda went to the restroom, and Tanya was distracted by her phone, scrolling through comments on her latest post. Alina looked at Jackson with the same love she had always carried for him, but her voice, no longer trembled with uncertainty. "Son, are you absolutely sure this woman is right for you? Have you noticed how she looks at you when you're not paying attention? How she talks about me?" Jackson swallowed hard. Tanya's head snapped up from her phone. Rhonda had just emerged from the restroom, her eyes sharp and alert. The atmosphere shifted like the moment before a violent storm. And then Jackson exploded with an anger that seemed rehearsed. "That's enough. Mom, you're jealous because I have another woman in my life now. You won't say it out loud, but you think it. You never could stand anyone else being important to me." Alina didn't defend herself. She didn't even flinch. She simply lowered her gaze to her untouched plate, set down her fork with careful precision, and in that terrible silence, she knew with absolute certainty that she had lost him. When they said goodbye that afternoon in the restaurant parking lot, no one hugged her. No one said they loved her. They simply walked away as if she were a stranger who had briefly interrupted their day. Upon arriving home, Alina carefully removed her shoes as if she didn't want to disturb anyone, even though she was completely alone. She sat on her bed and tried to remember the last time her son had said, "I love you," without her saying it first. She couldn't remember a single instance. The following weeks became a special kind of hell disguised as routine. Tanya and Rhonda began visiting Jackson more frequently at his office downtown. They brought him expensive lunches in designer containers, discussed investment opportunities, and suggested financial strategies. One evening, Tanya asked for full access to his bank account so she could better organize household expenses and plan for their future. "Trust me," she whispered, slowly unbuttoning her blouse in front of him. "We're a team, aren't we? Or don't you trust your own wife?" Jackson, trapped between desire and foolishness, agreed as he always did. Alina, meanwhile, didn't remain idle. She knew something was profoundly wrong, but she didn't know how to prove it yet. That's when she reached out to her neighbor Brenda, a woman who had worked as an accountant for 20 years at a pharmaceutical company before retiring. Now, she spent her days teaching neighborhood children basic mathematics in her living room. "Brenda, I need you to explain something to me. How can I tell if someone is tampering with my bank accounts?" Brenda frowned with concern. "Your son?" "Yes." "Do you have access to your bank statements?" "They don't come to me in the mail anymore, and I've never made a wire transfer in my life. I don't even know how that works." For several evenings, Brenda patiently taught Alina how to access the bank's online portal using her old smartphone, how to review transaction histories, and how to identify suspicious deposits and withdrawals. The first time Alina saw the complete list of transactions, she felt the world collapsing around her. Large amounts, recent dates, transfers that perfectly coincided with the days Jackson had visited or asked her to sign some supposedly routine document. Money leaving her account without any explanation she had authorized. "He had access," Alina said quietly. "He asked me for it to handle some insurance paperwork. He said it was necessary." "Alina, it's not paperwork," Brenda said gently but firmly. "It's theft." Alina's heart cracked, but she didn't cry. Instead, she asked for a fresh notebook and began meticulously writing down every single transaction: date, time, amount. Every stolen dollar now had a name permanently attached to it. One Friday evening, when everything seemed utterly lost, Brenda showed her something even more disturbing. "Look at this transaction here. Someone signed your name to activate a joint account, but the signature isn't yours. It's a crude forgery, barely even trying to match your handwriting." Alina touched the phone screen, as if touching an open wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. They didn't even bother to hide it properly. "What are you going to do?" Brenda asked. Alina closed her phone, took a deep breath that seemed to come from the very core of her being, and said with absolute calm, "Nothing. Not yet." Meanwhile in Rome, Jackson was beginning to feel a gnawing unease. Not from guilt about his mother, but because Tanya no longer looked at him the same way. Something had fundamentally changed. She no longer kissed him with genuine enthusiasm. She spent hours on her phone, laughing privately at messages he couldn't see. And Rhonda no longer even bothered to pretend she could tolerate his presence. One night, Jackson heard a conversation between them while pretending to be asleep in their hotel room. The words drifted through the open balcony door like poison. "It's done, why keep up this exhausting act?" That was Tanya's voice. "As soon as we get back to the States, we're liquidating everything and ditching him." Rhonda's laugh was harsh and cold. "And if he somehow finds out?" Tanya asked. "He's too slow to figure it out. He won't even notice until it's far too late." "And if he does eventually notice, so what? The old lady is going to die soon anyway. Who's going to defend him? Nobody." Back in Lowe's Angels, Alina began to move with surgical precision. She visited the main bank office downtown, requested complete printed statements for the past 2 years, and carefully placed them in labeled manila envelopes. Then she went to the public records office to inquire if there were any properties registered under her name that she didn't remember signing for. There she discovered something even more devastating than the stolen money. Jackson had attempted to register her house as a shared investment property using forged documents and altered signatures. The registration hadn't succeeded due to a technical error in the paperwork, but the attempt was clearly documented. Her own son had tried to steal her home. That day, Alina didn't go straight back to her house. She walked slowly to an old church at the back of the neighborhood, not to pray for forgiveness, but simply to sit on a wooden pew and stare at the altar in the gathering darkness. "Give me patience, God," she whispered into the empty space. "Not to forgive him, but to keep myself from destroying him with my own hands." Only silence answered her. When she finally returned home, she turned on her old radio, found a blues station, and began to knit with steady, methodical movements. But what she was knitting wasn't clothing or a blanket. She was knitting revenge, one careful stitch at a time. The seeds of ingratitude had been planted long ago, and now they were germinating in darkness. The harvest was approaching fast. Alina knew it. She felt it in her aching bones, in the way the wind blew through the cracks around her front door, as if nature itself was coming to warn her that everything buried in silence would soon break through the surface into terrible, undeniable light. The pre-dawn hours weighed less heavily on Alina now. The bone-deep cold that usually plagued her joints no longer bothered her in quite the same way. She had stopped counting the days with anxiety or dread. Instead, she counted them with strategy, with the kind of patience that comes from understanding exactly what needs to be done. She was sharpening a knife slowly, methodically, knowing she would use it at precisely the right moment. One morning, while sweeping her small living room with the old straw broom that had somehow lasted 15 years, Alina decided to move her armchair to clean the dust and debris underneath. Beneath it, she found the usual collection of forgotten items: dirt, tiny scraps of paper, a dried-out pen, and a badly folded white envelope tucked inside a crumpled plastic bag. She was going to throw everything away without looking, but something inside her screamed to check first. She opened the bag with trembling fingers. Inside was a legal document. She read it once, then twice, struggling to fully comprehend what the formal language was saying. It listed her complete name, her home address, and a signature that looked vaguely similar to hers but clearly wasn't. Then she read the header at the top of the page: "Last Will and Testament." Something squeezed her chest so tightly she couldn't breathe for several seconds. She sat down directly on the floor with the document spread across her legs and forced herself to read it again, this time understanding every horrible word. It was a will supposedly written by her, stating that upon her death, her house and all remaining savings would transfer entirely to Jackson Arthur Price. At the bottom was a signature, supposedly hers, clearly forged. She felt the silence of her house more intensely than ever before. Only the ticking of the kitchen clock and distant barking of neighborhood dogs broke through the oppressive quiet. She didn't cry, she wasn't even surprised anymore. But this time, something did break inside her, something that couldn't be repaired. It wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the absolute confirmation of what she had been trying not to believe. She called Walter immediately. "Come over right now, please." "What happened, Eleanor?" "I found what you needed to see." 2 hours later, Walter sat in her cramped kitchen with the document spread on the table before him. He read it with increasing disbelief, shaking his head slowly from side to side. "This is not only illegal, Eleanor. It's dangerous. If he had successfully filed this with the county, you could have lost your house without ever knowing what happened until it was far too late." "Do you think it was definitely him?" Eleanor asked, though she already knew the answer. Walter remained silent for a long moment. He placed the paper carefully back on the table. "This isn't your signature, and you have absolutely no idea how to draft a legal will. It's obviously fraudulent. The most serious part is that this appears to be a draft, which means if there's a draft, there may have been an actual attempt to file the real version somewhere." Eleanor stared at her own wrinkled hands, permanently stained by decades of harsh cleaning chemicals, but still steady and strong. She remembered the day she finally made the very last mortgage payment on this house. 30 brutal years of constant effort, reheated meals eaten standing up, shoes worn until they literally fell apart, working through the hottest summer days, cleaning up other people's disgusting messes, enduring employers' casual cruelty and careless shouts. All of it to have something that was truly hers, something no one could ever take away. "He wanted to kill me on paper," she said, without raising her voice above a whisper. Walter looked up sharply, unsure if she was speaking metaphorically or stating a literal truth. The silence between them stretched so long that the bubbling of coffee on the stove became the only sound in the small kitchen. "And now," Walter finally asked, "what are you going to do?" Eleanor smiled, the same enigmatic smile Jackson had never learned to read or understand in time. "Now I'm going to bury him, but he'll be wide awake to feel every moment of it." Not even 3 full days had passed since that devastating discovery when Eleanor received an unexpected phone call from Dr. Evans, the internist at the community health clinic, where she went for occasional checkups when she could afford them. "I need you to come in today, Miss Eleanor. Today if you possibly can." Eleanor felt her legs begin to tremble beneath her. She walked to the medical center with the same quiet dignity with which she had faced every crisis in her life. She entered the small office in her usual worn clothing, her faded scarf tied carefully, and carrying the little notebook where she wrote down every medication she took. Dr. Evans greeted her kindly, but his eyes held a compassion that smelled unmistakably like farewell. "We completed the new blood tests, and the results are not what we hoped for." Eleanor didn't respond. She simply looked at him, waiting for what she already somehow knew was coming. "You have leukemia, ma'am. It's in an advanced stage. It pains me tremendously to tell you this way, but there's no time for gentle approaches anymore. Your immune system is severely compromised. Based on the progression, we estimate you have approximately 6 months remaining." Eleanor froze completely still. She stared at a fixed point on the wall behind him, a small stain shaped vaguely like a bird. Not a single tear fell. Not a single question was asked. "Do you understand what I'm telling you?" the doctor asked gently. "I understand exactly how much it will cost me to die with dignity." Dr. Evans shifted uncomfortably in his chair, unsure how to respond to such stark acceptance. "There are treatment options available. We can start chemotherapy immediately, though I must be honest that it's not certain you'll respond well. The treatment is quite aggressive and prohibitively expensive for most patients." Does it make death come faster? Not necessarily, but… Then no, I refuse treatment. I don't want death to catch me wearing a hospital gown, hooked up to machines in some sterile room. I'd rather leave this world on my own terms. The doctor didn't know what to say. In all his years of practice, he had never seen anyone receive news of their own death with such absolute composure. Alina stood up slowly, gathered her purse, and before leaving the office, she turned back to face him one last time. 6 months is enough. For what I have to do, it's more than enough time. She walked home instead of taking the bus, not because she couldn't afford the fare, but because she needed to feel the city one more time. She wanted every step to take her back through her history, her struggles, her purpose. She crossed the intersection where she was once nearly hit by a speeding car while taking Jackson to preschool, holding his tiny hand in hers. She passed the corner market where she had worked cleaning restrooms for $40 a day when Jackson was in middle school. She waved to Mr. Theodore, the juice stand vendor who had no teeth left but possessed the sharpest memory in the neighborhood. When she finally arrived home, she went straight to her bedroom and pulled out a wooden box hidden under her bed. Inside was her notebook filled with evidence, newspaper clippings, receipts, unsent letters, and an old envelope containing the only photograph she had of Jackson as a small child, when he still slept curled against her leg every night. She looked at that innocent photograph for a long time, studying the face of the boy who no longer existed. Then she turned on her stove, put water on to boil, and as the steam began to rise, she murmured to herself with quiet determination, "No more praying now, the real work begins." The first thing Alina did was return to Walter's apartment with all her documentation. Together, they went to the main police station downtown to file a formal complaint, not as a heartbroken mother, but as a citizen reporting elder financial abuse. They reported the forgery of her signature, the unauthorized wire transfers, the attempted property theft, and attached every piece of evidence she had meticulously collected. Then they requested the immediate freezing of the bank account from which Jackson had withdrawn her life savings. To accomplish this, they used a legal clause that allowed the temporary suspension of financial transactions when elder financial abuse was suspected and documented. It wasn't easy to navigate the bureaucracy, but Walter knew every loophole in the system. He had lost faith in the law years ago, but for Alina, he was willing to dust off his legal expertise one final time. "Are you absolutely ready for what's coming next?" Walter asked as they signed the final complaint forms. "I was born ready," Alina replied without hesitation. "I just didn't know it until now." After that, Alina stopped at a corner store and bought a new notebook, this one bound in deep red leather. She went home and began writing what would become her final accounting, not one of tears and regret, but one of precise documentation. On the very first page, she wrote in her careful, shaky handwriting, "To my son Jackson, I delivered you from my womb with pain. I gave you my entire life with unconditional love, and you ripped away my dignity without even blinking. This is not revenge. It is justice, and justice is all I have left to die in peace." Meanwhile, in Rome, Jackson and Tanya continued their elaborate pretense of happiness. They uploaded daily photographs to social media, made videos with flattering filters, and posed with plates of expensive food they couldn't even pronounce correctly. But the tension between them was growing more evident with each passing day. Tanya no longer shared the bed willingly. Rhonda spent every waking moment on her phone, arranging things Jackson wasn't allowed to know about. And Jackson felt something slipping away from him, like an internal alarm that wouldn't stop ringing no matter how hard he tried to ignore it. One night, while searching through his email for a flight confirmation, Jackson stumbled upon a hidden folder. At first, he thought it was spam or a computer error, but when he opened it, he discovered it was an automatic backup of Tanya's private messages with someone named Marcus. His hands began shaking, as he read what he was never supposed to see. Tanya, we almost have everything now. The idiot doesn't suspect a single thing. Marcus, the money and the account access. Tanya, done. Everything's transferred. As soon as we get back to the States, we're leaving him in the dust. Marcus, what if he somehow finds out? Tanya, I honestly don't care anymore. Let him rot. I'm not staying with someone who still smells like his traumatized single mother. Jackson felt his stomach drop through the floor. He closed the laptop carefully, said absolutely nothing, and pretended to sleep when Tanya came to bed an hour later. But he couldn't close his eyes that entire night. And for the first time in what felt like years, he thought of his mother, her voice, the way she used to call him my little boy even when he towered over her, her rice pudding that tasted like childhood, how she would touch his forehead gently when he was sick, how she used to tell him, her voice full of absolute certainty, nobody will ever care for you the way I do. He wanted desperately to call her, to hear her voice, to apologize for everything. But he didn't. Pride and shame kept his fingers frozen. Eleanor, for her part, expected nothing from her son anymore. There was no longer any tenderness in her waiting, only cold, methodical planning. She visited government offices, made carefully worded phone calls, and activated every legal mechanism available to her. She formally declared Jackson's financial transactions as suspicious and potentially fraudulent. The system moved slowly, but it activated exactly as Walter had promised it would. An international alert was quietly issued, flagging Jackson's accounts for immediate review upon his return to United States territory. They wouldn't arrest him at the airport, but they would absolutely make him accountable for every stolen dollar. In her red leather notebook, Alina wrote with steady determination, "There is no justice more complete than that which is delivered without screaming. I will watch him lose everything without lifting a single finger against him. Karma is not paid with violence. It is served cold with infinite patience." And so the second, deeper betrayal didn't break Alina's spirit. Instead, it converted her into something stronger, colder, and ultimately freer than she had ever been. The mother had died inside her, buried under years of disrespect and casual cruelty. But the woman had finally awakened. It was only a matter of days now until Jackson returned to the United States, and he had absolutely no idea of the earthquake that was patiently waiting to swallow him whole. Jackson believed that hell was a place of fire, eternal punishment, and endless screaming. He never imagined it could be as cold as ancient Roman cobblestone streets at midnight, or as humiliating as having your credit card declined in a restaurant packed with judgmental tourists. It started with a single denial at the payment terminal, then another, and another. Within less than 48 hours, Jackson found himself completely empty-handed. No cash in his wallet, no active bank accounts, no way to pay for the luxury hotel room or the expensive meals or the designer clothes Tanya had insisted he buy. And he had two women looking at him, as if he were a diseased beggar they had mistakenly picked up off the street. Tanya screamed at him in the middle of a busy piazza in front of dozens of tourists who stopped their sightseeing to stare at the spectacle. "You shameless idiot! What did you do with all the money? I told you not to trust that poverty-stricken mother of yours. Now you've screwed us all over." Jackson tried to speak, tried to explain, but there weren't enough words in any language to clarify what he didn't even understand himself. He only knew something had gone terribly wrong. The accounts were frozen solid. His name had been linked to an international financial fraud investigation, and he had received an official notice requiring him to report to the American embassy the very next morning. That night, Rhonda looked at him with pure contempt dripping from every word. "I warned you about this, Tanya. This pathetic boy isn't even good enough for washing dishes. I'm going to find a decent hostel. I refuse to sleep another night in this dump with him." Tanya followed her mother without hesitation, not a word of goodbye, not even a backward glance. Jackson remained alone in the overpriced hotel room with a half-empty suitcase and the deafening buzz of betrayal echoing endlessly in his ears. Meanwhile, back in Los Angeles, Alina was weaving the final threads of her plan with the precision of someone creating an heirloom quilt. Everything fit together perfectly. Every careful movement made absolute sense. Walter helped her gather all the necessary legal documents to activate the International Capital Block, relying entirely on her official complaint of fraudulent use of an elderly person's financial accounts. He contacted an old colleague named Mr. Ernest, a federal agent in the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division, and managed to activate a mandatory alert for illicit fund withdrawal. This meant Jackson would face immediate review and questioning the moment he stepped onto United States territory. It wasn't revenge driven by hatred. There was no personal malice in Alina's actions. There was only justice, pure and inevitable. In her red leather notebook, she wrote with perfect clarity, "Sometimes a mother's love also has to hurt, not out of hatred, but to teach a lesson that cannot be learned any other way. Because what is allowed is repeated endlessly, and what is repeated eventually rots from within. I didn't give birth to a thief, but the world turned him into one, and I allowed it by staying silent. If I have to be the one to finally put the brakes on him, then so be it. This is my last gift to my son." Brenda accompanied Alina in supportive silence through many of those difficult procedures. She was no longer just a neighbor. She had become Alina's closest accomplice and trusted confidant. "Doesn't it hurt you to do this, Alina?" Brenda asked one evening. "Of course it hurts. It hurts like tearing off my own skin while I'm still alive. But there are some pains that heal what needs healing, and there are some lessons that can only be taught through suffering." The meeting at the American Embassy in Rome was a spectacular display of shame for Jackson. They escorted him into a cold, windowless interrogation room with a young consular lawyer and an official translator who spoke in a flat, mechanical tone that made everything sound even worse. They explained in clinical detail that there was an active criminal complaint filed in the United States, that his mother's funds had been frozen by official preemptive order, that he would have to provide a complete accounting of every transaction the moment he returned to American soil. Jackson left the embassy with a face that looked like it had aged 10 years in a single afternoon. He felt his entire world crumbling into dust. For the first time in what felt like forever, he thought seriously about his mother, not as an obstacle to his ambitions, but as the human being who had sacrificed everything for him. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that all of this destruction had come directly from her. Then, like a lost child who finally realizes he's alone in the dark, he dialed her number with trembling fingers. "Mom," he said the moment she answered, his voice breaking on that single word. On the other end of the line, Alina stood in her kitchen cleaning black-eyed peas with the same old metal strainer she had used for 30 years, as if nothing unusual or dramatic were happening. She recognized his voice immediately, and her hand trembled slightly, but not enough to drop the phone. "Mom, what did you do? They took everything from me. I'm completely alone here. Tanya left. Rhonda abandoned me too. The embassy officials told me you did all of this." Alina remained silent for a long moment. She took a deep breath that seemed to come from the very bottom of her soul, and then replied with a voice that was serene, firm, and utterly unshakable, as if speaking from a place Jackson could no longer access or understand. "I didn't take anything from you, son. I simply stopped you from taking everything from me. Mom, they're saying they might arrest me when I land. You always promised you would be there for me no matter what. You said that my whole life. I was there for you, Jackson. I was there every single day until you stopped being there for yourself. Please help me, I'm begging you. I don't know what to do anymore." Alina's response was a single word, spoken with finality. "Learn." Then she hung up the phone. She gave him nothing more. No tears of maternal weakness. No desperate apologies, no detailed explanations. It was the first time in her entire life that she had allowed herself to believe that her son needed to suffer in order to finally understand what he had done. Because sometimes, she understood now, pain teaches lessons that love never could. That night, Alina didn't sleep, but not from anguish or regret. Instead, she sat at her small kitchen table and wrote Jackson a letter. It wasn't a farewell exactly. It was an emotional testament, something she would leave in the red notebook on the very last page for him to find when he returned, if he ever bothered to look. My dearest Jackson, you were my reason for getting up every single morning for 40 years. You were my fight, my strength, my pride, my entire purpose for existing. I gave you what I had and what I didn't have. I denied myself food, rest, companionship, and every comfort for you. And I don't regret a single sacrifice. I did it all with pure love. But you forgot who you were. You surrounded yourself with ghosts wearing expensive perfume and designer clothes. And in their eagerness to erase me while I was still alive, they forced me to finally wake up and see the truth. I don't hate you, my son. I couldn't hate you if I tried. But I am no longer the woman who waits in patient silence for her child to remember she exists. Now I am the one who teaches you, even if that teaching hurts us both. And if you ever truly repent, if you ever genuinely understand what you've done, this letter will be waiting here for you. Not to save you from the consequences of your choices, but so you can never claim that no one warned you or tried to show you the truth. At the end of the letter, she drew a small, simple heart. It was the sweetest thing she had left to give him. Jackson wandered the streets of Rome completely aimless for 2 more days. He slept in the cheapest hostel he could find, sharing a room with 5 strangers. Sometimes he managed to eat. Sometimes he went hungry. He had no one left to call. Neither Tanya nor Rhonda answered their phones anymore, and he knew with crushing certainty that his return to the United States wouldn't be a landing. It would be a devastating crash. Finally, he booked the cheapest return flight he could find, traveling with fear like ice in his bones and shame burning in his chest. He knew they would be waiting for him at the airport, not with welcoming hugs, but with outstanding debts and serious legal questions. Alina, for her part, was completely ready. Her health was deteriorating rapidly now, but her soul felt clearer and more at peace than it had in decades. She had shaved her head with sewing scissors before the chemotherapy could steal her hair as a final indignity. She did it alone in her bathroom, looking at herself in the mirror, and said aloud to her reflection, "Now I finally look like who I truly am." Walter accompanied her to her last doctor's appointment. Dr. Evans confirmed what they both already knew. The cancer was advancing rapidly and aggressively. She would be lucky to see Christmas. Alina simply nodded her acceptance. "You know something, doctor," she said quietly. "I was never afraid of dying. What hurt me for so many years was not being able to leave this world in peace. But now I know I will leave with everything settled and balanced. That's all I ever wanted." That night, alone in her bed, Alina felt a sharp, stabbing pain in her chest. She doubled over, clutching herself, but she didn't call anyone for help. She just hugged herself tightly, murmuring her son's name over and over, not as a complaint or accusation, but as a kind of farewell. The silence before the storm was exactly that. The precise moment before the complete collapse, the false calm that precedes the inevitable destruction. But Alina didn't fear the approaching end anymore. She had done what she needed to do. And Jackson was about to face the debris of the life he himself had destroyed, one selfish choice at a time. When Jackson's plane finally touched down at Los Angeles International Airport, he felt nothing but crushing dread. The captain's cheerful welcome announcement seemed to mock him. The mixture of languages from fellow passengers felt like noise from another dimension. He didn't care about the modern architecture or the crowds of reuniting families. He hadn't traveled home to admire anything or reunite with anyone. He had come home to face judgment. At almost 30 years old, his body trembled uncontrollably, but not with fear exactly. The physical exhaustion was overwhelming, yes, but what consumed him was something darker, the absolute certainty that he had destroyed everything that ever mattered. He walked through customs like a condemned man approaching the gallows. 2 federal agents were waiting for him just past baggage claim, exactly as the embassy had warned. They weren't aggressive or dramatic. They simply asked him to accompany them to a private office for questioning. For 6 hours, Jackson sat in a sterile room answering questions about every transaction, every forged signature, every lie he had told himself to justify stealing from his own mother. The agents were professional and thorough. They had all of Alina's documentation, every piece of evidence she had painstakingly collected. By the time they released him with a court date and a list of restrictions, Jackson felt like a hollowed-out shell of a human being. He had nowhere to go. His apartment had been sublet months ago to help pay for the Rome trip. Tanya had changed all the locks and wasn't responding to any messages. His former coworkers had seen the viral video of his mother confronting him at the embassy and wanted nothing to do with him. So Jackson did the only thing he could think of. He walked the streets of South Central, the neighborhood where he had grown up, the place he had been so desperate to escape. The neighborhood was exactly the same cracked sidewalks, the same graffiti-covered walls, the same street vendors selling everything from fresh fruit to bootleg electronics as the sun set. But something inside Jackson was permanently, irrevocably different. Every street corner held a memory that now felt like an accusation. He passed the elementary school where his mother had walked him every morning, holding his small hand in hers, her uniform apron smelling of industrial bleach and cheap detergent, her shoes always worn down at the heels because she couldn't afford new ones. She always used to tell him with absolute conviction, "You won't spend your life scrubbing floors like me, baby. You'll have your own desk, your own office, your own suit and tie. You're going to make something of yourself." And he had achieved all of that for a brief, shining moment, until he traded it all for lies and the approval of people who never actually cared about him. Alina was already back in Los Angeles when Jackson finally worked up the courage to approach her street. She had returned alone from Rome, needing no one's company or support. She had lived her entire adult life in the company of her own silence, and it no longer felt heavy or burdensome. She settled back into her house with its cracked walls, concrete floors, and the rocking chair that creaked rhythmically when she moved. She settled back into her life like someone returning to the only place they should never have left. Walter brought her medications every few days, carefully organizing them in labeled pill containers. Brenda prepared light soups and soft foods that Alina's weakening body could still digest. The closest neighbors looked after her in spontaneous, unspoken shifts, not because she asked for help, but because dignity and grace are honored while a person is still alive. Alina became something of a neighborhood legend in those final months. Some of the younger children thought she had traveled overseas to punish wicked people, like some kind of superhero grandmother. Others whispered that she was a witch who could curse ungrateful children. Still others claimed she had faced down dangerous criminals and won. Only a handful of people knew the real truth, and they said nothing, protecting her privacy with fierce loyalty. Alina didn't speak much during those final months. She listened to blues music on her old radio every afternoon. Sometimes she sat on her front porch and watched the neighborhood children play in the street. She laughed with genuine joy at their games and gave them candy when they ran up to her porch, listening intently when they told elaborate childhood lies about their adventures. She had finally recovered her peace, though not her physical strength. The cancer was advancing slowly but steadily, exactly as Dr. Evans had predicted. Every week she seemed more fragile, more translucent. Her clothes hung loose on her shrinking frame. Her hands trembled constantly now. But she never stopped walking through every room of her house each morning. She never allowed herself to simply surrender and fall. One Sunday morning, Jackson finally gathered enough courage to walk down her street. He carried a small bag containing fresh donuts from the bakery she used to take him to when he was little. He had spent the entire previous night awake, wrestling with whether he should attempt to see her. He hadn't slept or eaten properly in days, but something deep inside him demanded that he try. He didn't expect her to open the door or welcome him. He just desperately wanted to see her, to confirm she was still breathing, still existing in the world he had tried so hard to escape. From the opposite sidewalk, he finally spotted her sitting in her rocking chair on the front porch. She wore an old cardigan sweater and had a colorful shawl draped over her thin shoulders. Her face was gaunt but not defeated. She smiled warmly at some children playing nearby. One small boy brought her a wilted flower he had picked from the community park, and she hugged him as tenderly as if he were her own flesh and blood. Jackson didn't cross the street. He couldn't make his feet move forward. He just stood there watching her from a distance, feeling a knot of emotion tighten in his throat until he could barely breathe. Finally, he walked slowly to her porch, left the bag of donuts on the top step, and walked away before she could see him clearly. Alina didn't look up in that moment, but somehow she felt his presence. She knew he had been there. She didn't open the door, not that day. Over the following weeks, Jackson returned again and again, always at the same time in the early morning. He left small offerings each time: fresh flowers from the corner market, pastries from her favorite bakery, handwritten notes that said simply, "I'm sorry," without signing his name. He never dared to knock on the door. He never asked to be let inside. He knew he had no right to any of that anymore. He was simply paying a debt, though he understood the debt could never truly end. One quiet evening, Alina picked up her red leather notebook and opened it to the very last page. With a hand that trembled from illness but remained steady in purpose, she wrote her final message to her son. It wasn't long or elaborate. It was just enough, just like everything else about Alina's life had always been. "My son, love is not demanded or required. It is given freely, or it is not love at all. If you have finally learned that simple truth, then perhaps you are not completely lost anymore. Don't look for me when I'm gone from this world. I will be present in every mistake you choose not to repeat, in every act of genuine kindness you perform without expecting anything in return. If you want to truly forgive yourself, start by being kind to others who cannot repay you. And if you ever manage to see your mother reflected in the eyes of another struggling woman, don't fail her the way you failed me. That will be my redemption, and perhaps yours as well." She signed the letter with her full name in careful script, folded it precisely, placed it in a clean white envelope, and wrote in black ink across the front, "For Jackson when he's finally ready." The morning Alina stopped breathing was surprisingly bright and beautiful. Warm California sunshine streamed through her windows, creating patterns of light on her worn furniture. On her lap were the red leather notebook, the sealed envelope, and a blanket she had knitted with her own failing hands over the past month. The neighbors found her a few hours later, surrounded by dozens of flowers that the neighborhood children had left on her porch throughout the week. Her face held a serenity that cannot be faked or forced. There was no drama, no crying out in pain, no desperate final struggle. Only profound calm after a lifetime of storms. Walter arrived first, called by a worried neighbor. He looked at Alina's peaceful face for a long moment, then gently closed her eyes with his weathered hand. He didn't cry. He knew Alina wouldn't have wanted tears. He knew she had died exactly as she had lived, with unshakable dignity. Brenda organized the wake with help from neighbors who had loved Alina. It was humble but overflowing with genuine affection. They refused elaborate flower arrangements from strangers. accepting only flowers from the community park, children's drawings, and the blues music Alina had loved listening to every afternoon. Jackson wasn't officially notified of his mother's death, but somehow he knew the exact moment it happened. He knew when the wind changed direction, and something essential went out of his chest like a candle being extinguished. He ran to her house and found the front door standing open. There were candles lit throughout the small living room. No one stopped him from entering. No one embraced him either. He walked slowly to where his mother's body lay, still and silent. He fell to his knees beside her. He touched her hands, and they were already cold. Next to her body, he found the envelope with his name written across it in her distinctive handwriting. He opened it with shaking hands and read every word aloud in a broken whisper, alone except for his mother's silent presence. He cried then, but not the way he had cried before in his life. He cried in complete silence, exactly the way she had taught him through her final lesson. In the corner of the room sat an open wooden box. Inside was a faded photograph of Jackson as a small child, maybe 4 years old, with a handwritten note on the back that read simply, "I still believe in you, son. I always will." Jackson took the photograph and pressed it against his chest, then walked out to the small backyard and sat in the rocking chair where Alina used to sit every evening. He looked up at the vast California sky and finally understood with devastating clarity that he had lost his mother forever. But perhaps, if he worked hard enough and lived differently enough, he could still somehow find himself. Days later, neighbors reported that the man who used to bring donuts had moved into Alina's house. He brought no new furniture, no modern luxuries, no visitors or friends. Only an old rocking chair, a red leather notebook, and a single photograph displayed on the mantel. Those who leave this world make space behind them. Those who remain sometimes fill that space with bitter memory, and sometimes, if they're fortunate and willing to change, with hard-earned redemption. Jackson lived like a ghost in his mother's house for the first month. He moved through the rooms she had occupied for decades, as if walking through a museum dedicated to his own failures. Every object told a story he had been too blind or selfish to see when it mattered. The kitchen was the hardest room to enter. The old gas stove where she had cooked thousands of meals. The chipped plates she had used for 40 years because she couldn't justify buying new ones when the old ones still worked. The metal strainer she used for black-eyed peas, now sitting clean and unused in the dish rack. He found recipes written in her shaky handwriting tucked into a cookbook so worn the spine had separated. Jackson's favorite pot roast, birthday cake for my boy, chicken soup for when he's sick. Each one felt like an accusation written in love. He slept in his old childhood bedroom, which Alina had kept exactly as he had left it when he moved out at 22. His high school trophies still lined the shelf. His college acceptance letter was still pinned to the corkboard. A framed photograph showed him in his graduation cap and gown, Alina standing beside him, her face radiating pure pride and joy. He had given her so little, and she had celebrated everything he accomplished as if he had handed her the world. The red leather notebook sat on the kitchen table like a living thing, demanding to be read but terrifying to open. For 3 weeks, Jackson circled it without touching it, afraid of what additional truths it might contain. Finally, on a gray morning when rain fell steadily outside, he sat down and opened it. The first pages documented every transaction he had stolen, dates, amounts, what he had claimed the money was for versus what he actually spent it on. Her handwriting was meticulous despite the tremor in her aging hands. Further in, she had written observations about his relationship with Tanya. Today Jackson came to visit for the first time in 6 weeks. He looked thin and tired. When I asked if everything was all right, he said Tanya thinks I asked too many questions. I didn't ask any more after that. I don't want to lose him by caring too much. Jackson's birthday today. I called, but Tanya answered and said they had plans and couldn't talk long. I could hear him in the background laughing with other people. I wonder if he even remembers I called. Saw on social media that Jackson and Tanya went to Hawaii for vacation. He told me last month he couldn't help with my roof repair because money was tight. I didn't say anything. I never do. Jackson read page after page, tears streaming down his face, as his mother's silent suffering unfolded in careful documentation. She had seen everything, understood everything, and said nothing because she feared that speaking up would drive him away completely. The final entries were the most devastating. The money is gone, all of it. Jackson took everything I spent 30 years saving. I should be angry, but I just feel empty, like something inside me finally broke beyond repair. Maybe this is what I needed to finally let go. And then I'm dying. 6 months, maybe less. I won't tell Jackson because I don't want him to come back out of guilt. If he comes back at all, I want it to be because he finally understands what love actually means. Real love, not the conditional kind I accepted from him for too long. Jackson closed the notebook and sat in silence for hours, unable to move or think or feel anything except crushing shame. The neighborhood gradually accepted his presence, though they watched him carefully. Mr. Theodore from the juice stand nodded to him but didn't speak. Brenda brought him food occasionally but never stayed to chat. The children who had loved Alina gave him suspicious looks, as if he were an intruder in a sacred space. He understood he had to earn back what he had destroyed, and it would take far longer than 6 months or a year or perhaps even a lifetime. He started small. He repaired the roof his mother had needed fixed, paying for it with money earned from a job washing dishes at a diner downtown. The work was humiliating for someone with a college degree, but he kept showing up every day. He fixed the crack in the front walkway. He painted the exterior walls. He replaced the broken porch light that had been dark for 2 years. Every improvement he made to the house felt like a prayer of apology to a God who might not be listening anymore. 3 months after Alina's death, Jackson finally worked up the courage to visit Walter. The old lawyer opened the door with a guarded expression. He didn't invite Jackson inside immediately. They stood on opposite sides of the threshold for a long, uncomfortable moment. "I read the notebook," Jackson said quietly, "all of it." Walter's expression softened slightly, and I understand now what I couldn't see before. I understand that my mother loved me so much that she allowed herself to disappear, and I let her. Understanding is the first step, Walter said, but understanding doesn't erase what happened. I know I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm just asking, how do I live with this? How do I keep going knowing what I did to her? Walter studied Jackson's face for a long moment, seeing genuine anguish there for the first time. You live with it by becoming different. You honor her by being the man she believed you could be, not the man you actually were. That's the only redemption available to you now. Jackson nodded slowly. The legal case, the charges, what happens with all of that? Your mother made arrangements before she died, Walter said. She had me petition the court to drop the criminal charges on the condition that you complete a financial rehabilitation program and pay back every dollar over time through a structured payment plan. The civil case remains open, but there won't be jail time if you comply with the terms. Jackson felt his legs weaken. She did that even after everything. She did that because despite everything, she was still your mother. She wanted you to learn and change, not just be punished. She believed in redemption, even when you didn't deserve it. Jackson covered his face with his hands, his body shaking with silent sobs. Don't waste her final gift to you, Walter said firmly. She bought you a second chance with her last breaths. Make it count for something. Over the following months, Jackson methodically worked to rebuild some small semblance of a life worth living. He took additional jobs, working 18-hour days sometimes. He attended the financial counseling sessions required by the court. He began making small monthly payments toward the debt he owed his mother's estate. The money would go to a community fund Alina had established in her will, dedicated to helping single mothers in South Central with emergency expenses. Even in death, she was still taking care of others. Jackson also began volunteering at a community center 2 evenings a week, helping elderly residents with basic tasks: grocery shopping, reading mail, filling out forms, simple companionship. He met Miss Dorothy, an 82-year-old woman who reminded him painfully of his mother. She had been abandoned by her children, left alone in a cramped apartment with barely enough money for food. Jackson started visiting her every Sunday, bringing groceries he paid for himself and sitting with her while she told stories about her life. He fixed her leaking sink. He helped her apply for benefits she didn't know existed. He made sure she wasn't alone on holidays. He couldn't save his mother, but perhaps he could honor her by caring for someone else's mother the way he should have cared for his own. One Sunday afternoon, Miss Dorothy looked at Jackson with watery eyes and said something that broke him. "You're a good boy. Your mama must be so proud of you." Jackson had to excuse himself and cry in the bathroom for 10 minutes before he could compose himself enough to return. Tanya had completely vanished from his life, which was somehow both a relief and a reminder of his foolishness. He heard through mutual acquaintances that she and her mother had moved to Arizona and were running some kind of online business, probably scamming other vulnerable people. Jackson felt nothing when he heard this news. No anger, no desire for revenge, just a hollow acknowledgement that he had allowed himself to be used because he wanted to believe he was something he wasn't. He had wanted to be the kind of man who belonged in expensive restaurants and luxury hotels, when the truth was he had always belonged exactly where he started, in a modest house in South Central, with a mother who loved him unconditionally. 6 months after Alina's death, Jackson received an unexpected visitor. A young woman named Grace knocked on his door one Saturday morning. She was perhaps 25 years old, neatly dressed, and holding a manila folder. "Are you Jackson Price?" she asked nervously. "Yes, can I help you?" "My name is Grace Williams. Your mother helped my family when I was 16 years old. She heard from a neighbor that we were about to be evicted, and she showed up at our door with an envelope containing $800 in cash. She told my mama not to worry about paying it back, just to help someone else when she could." Jackson felt his throat tighten. $800. That would have been nearly all his mother had in savings at that time, before he had encouraged her to open the account he eventually drained. "I didn't know she did that," he said quietly. "She did it for dozens of families over the years," Grace continued. "Never asked for recognition or thanks, just helped people and moved on. I graduated from nursing school last year, Mr. Price. I'm working at County General now. I came because I wanted you to know that your mother's kindness changed my entire life's trajectory. She saved my family, and I've been able to help other families because of what she started." She handed him the folder. Inside were photos of Alina with various families Jackson had never met, all taken over the years at community events. In every picture, his mother's face glowed with genuine joy. This was the life she had lived while he was busy being ashamed of her, while he was making excuses not to visit, while he was stealing her money to impress people who didn't actually care about him. "Thank you for telling me this," Jackson managed to say. After Grace left, Jackson sat on the porch where Alina used to sit and finally allowed himself to fully break down. Not the silent, controlled crying he had been doing for months, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere so deep inside him he didn't know that place existed. He cried for the mother he had taken for granted. He cried for the years he had wasted chasing hollow success. He cried for the person he had been and the person he needed to become. When he finally stopped, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that Alina would have loved. The neighborhood children were being called inside for dinner. The ice cream truck played its familiar tune one last time before heading home for the night. And Jackson understood something fundamental. He couldn't bring his mother back or undo what he had done, but he could spend the rest of his life trying to become worthy of the belief she had placed in him, even when he didn't deserve it. He could become the kind of man who helped people without expecting anything in return. He could become the kind of son she had always deserved, even if she would never see it. That evening, Jackson opened Alina's old recipe book and carefully prepared her pot roast using the exact instructions she had written in the margins. The kitchen filled with familiar smells that transported him back to childhood, to Sunday dinners when things were simple and love was unconditional. He ate alone at the small kitchen table, and for the first time since her death, he felt something other than shame and regret. He felt purpose. He felt like maybe, just maybe, redemption was actually possible if he was willing to work for it every single day for the rest of his life. He thought about what Walter had said. You honor her by being the man she believed you could be. Jackson pulled out a new notebook, not red leather like his mother's, but simple and practical, and wrote on the first page, "Things I will do to honor Alina Price, my mother." The list started with immediate actions. Pay the debt, help Miss Dorothy, volunteer more hours, learn to genuinely listen to people instead of just waiting to talk. But it also included longer-term commitments. Never take advantage of someone's love again. Speak up when he saw others being mistreated. Use whatever privileges he had to help those with fewer advantages. Teach any future children he might have about the grandmother who sacrificed everything so he could have opportunities she never did. He wrote until his hand cramped, and the pages were full of promises. He knew that words on paper meant nothing without action. He had made plenty of empty promises before. But this time felt different. This time, he had nothing left to prove to anyone except the memory of a woman who had loved him more than he deserved and who had taught him, through her final devastating lesson, what unconditional love actually looked like. It looked like suffering in silence so your child could thrive. It looked like giving everything and expecting nothing in return. It looked like delivering justice, not through violence or cruelty, but through truth and consequences that created the possibility of genuine change. Alina had loved him enough to let him fall completely, so that he might finally learn to stand on his own. And now, in her absence, Jackson was finally beginning to understand what it meant to stand up. 2 years had passed since Alina Price took her last breath in the rocking chair she had owned for over 20 years. 2 years since Jackson had knelt beside her body and finally understood the magnitude of what he had lost. The house on Maple Ridge Drive no longer felt like a tomb of guilt and regret. Jackson had slowly transformed it into something else, a living memorial, a place where his mother's spirit of generosity continued to breathe. He had kept his promise to Walter and to himself. Every month, without fail, he made his payment toward the debt. Every week, he volunteered at the community center. Every day, he tried to be a better version of the person he had been. The dishwashing job at the diner had led to a position as assistant manager. The pay wasn't impressive, but it was honest work, and Jackson had learned that honest work done with dignity meant more than any prestigious title earned through manipulation and theft. Miss Dorothy had become like a second mother to him, though he was careful never to say that out loud. She was frailer now, needing more help, and Jackson made sure she was never alone for more than a day or two. He had helped her reconnect with one of her daughters, facilitating a painful but necessary reconciliation that reminded him of opportunities he had lost forever. On the second anniversary of Alina's death, the neighborhood organized a small memorial gathering. Jackson hadn't planned it. Brenda and some of the other neighbors had taken the initiative, wanting to honor the woman who had quietly helped so many of them over the years. They gathered in the small community park where Alina used to sit and watch the children play. More than 50 people attended, many of them families Jackson had never met, all with stories about how Alina had touched their lives. A woman named Patricia stood up to speak, her voice trembling with emotion. Miss Alina gave my son his first job when he was 17, and everyone else said he was too troubled to hire. She paid him from her own pocket to help her with yard work, and she spent those hours teaching him about responsibility and self-respect. My son is in college now, studying engineering. He wouldn't be there without her believing in him when no one else did. Another man, Marcus, shared how Alina had secretly paid 3 months of his rent when he lost his job and was about to be evicted with his family. She made me promise only one thing, he said, that when I got back on my feet, I would help someone else the same way. I've kept that promise. I've helped 4 families now, and I tell every one of them about Miss Alina. Story after story emerged, painting a picture of a woman who had lived an extraordinary life of quiet service, while her own son was too blind to see it. Jackson stood up last, his legs shaking, his voice barely above a whisper. "My mother gave me everything," he began, "and I gave her nothing but pain in return. I stole from her. I abandoned her. I chose people who didn't love me over the one person who loved me unconditionally. And she still, even in her final months while she was dying, she protected me. She gave me a chance to change instead of just destroying me the way I deserved." His voice broke, but he forced himself to continue. "I can't bring her back. I can't undo what I did. But I can promise you all this. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be the man she believed I could be. I will help people the way she helped people. I will love without conditions the way she loved me. And I will make sure that everyone knows her name and her story so that her kindness doesn't die with her." There wasn't a dry eye in the gathering. After the memorial, as people were leaving, a teenage boy approached Jackson hesitantly. He was thin, wearing clothes that didn't quite fit, with the look of someone carrying burdens too heavy for his age. "Mr. Price, my name is David. I heard about your mother and what she did for people, and I heard that you're trying to be like her now." "I'm trying," Jackson said. "What can I do for you, David?" "My mom is sick, real sick, and we're about to lose our apartment because she can't work. I don't know what to do and I don't have anyone to ask. I just thought, maybe." Jackson felt something shift in his chest, like a door opening that had been locked for years. "Come with me," he said gently. "Let's sit down and figure this out together." They spent the next 3 hours in Alina's kitchen, Jackson's kitchen now, but it would always be hers, going through David's family situation. Jackson made phone calls to social services, helped David's mother apply for emergency assistance, and wrote a personal check to cover their immediate rent shortage. It wasn't a fortune. It was money Jackson had earned through long hours of work that left his back aching and his feet swollen. But it was given freely, with no expectation of repayment, just as his mother had given. As David was leaving, clutching the paperwork and the check, he turned back with tears in his eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Price. You don't know what this means." "I do know," Jackson said quietly. "And David, when you're in a position to help someone else someday, you do it. That's how we honor the people who helped us. We pass it forward." After David left, Jackson sat alone in his mother's rocking chair on the front porch. The sun was setting in brilliant colors, and the neighborhood was settling into its evening rhythm. He pulled out the red leather notebook he now kept with him always, and he turned to the last page where his mother had written her final letter to him. He had read it hundreds of times, but it never failed to move him. "Don't look for me when I'm gone. I will be in every mistake you choose not to repeat, in every act of kindness you do without expecting anything in return. I see you, Mom," he whispered to the empty air. "Every single day I see you." A small girl from across the street ran up to the porch. holding a handful of dandelions she had picked from the park. "These are for Miss Alina," she said seriously, placing them on the porch railing next to a framed photograph Jackson kept there. "My mama says she's in heaven watching us." "Thank you, sweetheart," Jackson said, his throat tight. "She would have loved these." The girl ran off, and Jackson gently picked up the wilted dandelions, carrying them inside to press between the pages of his mother's recipe book, preserving them the way he wished he could have preserved every moment he had wasted with her. That night, Jackson wrote in his own journal, a practice he had started as part of his commitment to change. "Today I helped someone the way Mom would have helped them. It felt right. It felt like maybe I'm finally becoming the person she saw in me even when I couldn't see it in myself. The debt I owe her can never be fully repaid, but every act of kindness is a payment toward that impossible balance. Every person I help is a way of saying thank you to a woman who can no longer hear me but who I hope somehow knows." 3 months later, Jackson received notification that he had made his final official payment on the debt to his mother's estate. The money had helped 17 single mothers with emergency expenses, funded after-school programs for at-risk youth, and provided groceries for elderly residents struggling to make ends meet. Walter called him to acknowledge the completion of the payment plan. "You did it, Jackson. You fulfilled the legal obligation. The criminal case is officially closed." "It doesn't feel finished," Jackson said. "It never will." "That's how you know you've actually changed," Walter replied. The old Jackson would have been relieved to have the legal issue resolved and would have moved on. The new Jackson understands that the real debt has no end date. Your mother would be proud of that understanding. "I hope so," Jackson said quietly. "I really hope so." That evening, Jackson organized a small gathering at the house, not a party, but a quiet dinner for the people who had helped him become better. Walter came, his steps slower now but his mind still sharp. Brenda arrived with her famous pecan pie. Miss Dorothy attended with her daughter, the reconciliation Jackson had helped facilitate now blossoming into a genuine relationship. David came too with his mother, who was in remission and back at work. They brought flowers and gratitude that filled the small house with warmth. As they ate together around Alina's old kitchen table, sharing stories and laughter, Jackson felt something he hadn't felt in years: genuine peace. Not the absence of guilt, he would carry that forever, but the peace that comes from knowing you're finally walking in the right direction, even if you can never undo the wrong turns you took before. After everyone left, Jackson sat alone with the red leather notebook one final time. He carefully wrote his own entry on the last blank page. "Mom, I can't change the past. I can't give you back the years I stole or the money I took or the respect you deserved. But I can promise you this: your silence taught me more than my words ever could. Your dignity in suffering showed me what strength actually looks like. Your forgiveness, even when I didn't deserve it, gave me a chance to become someone worth forgiving. I am not the son you deserved, but I'm trying every day to become the man you believed I could be. Your legacy isn't in the money you saved or the house you left behind. It's in every life you touched, every person you helped, every act of quiet kindness that rippled outward in ways you never saw. I see them now, and I'm adding my own ripples to the water, hoping they eventually reach you wherever you are. Thank you, Mom, for everything, especially for loving me enough to let me fall so I could finally learn to stand. Your son, Jackson." He closed the notebook gently and placed it on the shelf next to her photograph, next to the pressed dandelions, next to all the evidence of a life lived with purpose and grace. Outside, the neighborhood settled into sleep. Children were tucked into bed, porch lights flickered on. The ice cream truck's melody faded into the distance one final time. And in a small house in South Central Los Angeles, a man who had once been lost sat in his mother's rocking chair and finally understood what it meant to be found. Not through grand gestures or dramatic redemption, but through the quiet, daily choice to be better than he was yesterday. to help without expecting reward, to love without demanding anything in return, to honor a woman who had asked for nothing and given everything. Alina Price had died 2 years ago, but her legacy lived on in every life her son now touched, in every person he helped, in every moment he chose kindness over selfishness. She had taught him the most powerful lesson of all, that sometimes the greatest love is delivered not through words, but through silence that speaks louder than any scream ever could. And in that silence, Jackson finally heard his mother's voice clearly, telling him what she had always wanted him to know. "I believe in you, my son, I always have. Now believe in yourself." The rocking chair creaked gently as Jackson closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, slept without nightmares. Because he was finally, slowly, becoming the man his mother had always seen in him. And that was enough. Sometimes the deepest wounds come from those we love most, but sometimes, if we're willing to face the truth and do the hard work of change, those same wounds can teach us how to finally, truly live with purpose and grace. This is dedicated to every mother who loved in silence, every child who learned too late, and every person brave enough to choose redemption over regret.